to see how Copilot interacts with the systems. And I'm going to be pulling things off my screen and making sure that the data that's being presented isn't going to show anything that shouldn't be shown. And this is live data from an Envision tenant. I have an administrator account that I'm going to be using. We also have regular user accounts in the system too. So I'll be bouncing back and forth between them. So our agenda for today, we're going to take Copilot, which is a completely different way of thinking and working and interacting. It's AI, and breaking it down to four primary sections or elements, right? We have the foundational element, which really is about cybersecurity and how it works. We'll talk about extending Copilot, bringing it into different data sources, different data areas. We're going to talk a bit about how you save your data moving forward. So Copilot can really build the story and understand where you came from and how you need to go where you're going with it. And then we'll talk about prompt engineering, which is, while AI is new and AI is trying to learn the right way to interact with you, we need to, understand how to interact with AI also. It's not something that we inherently have the skill set for. So we'll talk about prompt engineering, how to craft a good prompt, and then really how to interact with the AI. So let's talk about Copilot theoretically at first. And again, we'll get a couple of slides, and then more or less the rest of the time is going to be demos and whatnot. So stop me at any point. Let's interact. You have four different sets of Copilots. You actually have much, much more than the four. So Copilot all the way to the left is Copilot that's a free version, right? Today we'll be talking a little bit about the free and a little bit about Copilot from Microsoft 365, which is a paid version of it. Some of the differences between them. You can see in here, there's different portions of it. Graph grounding is one we're going to dive into a little bit. We're not going to touch so much on Copilot Studio just because of time, but we will talk about 365 apps and grounding and other of those foundational capabilities. Copilot for sales, really just for your sales team. Copilot for service is for companies like ours. If we wanted our service team to interact with the data in certain methods and ways, we could certainly go down the path and get those licenses. You also have Copilot for developers, which is GitHub Copilot and whatnot. So there's many different types of Copilots out there, and there's not one size fits all for everybody. But today we'll talk about Copilot for 365 and what it can do. So let's start some demos, right? Because I'm a demo guy. I'm a visual learner. All right. So Copilot. Let's talk about how to get to Copilot. Simply to put, just go into copilot.microsoft.com. And it's very simple just to get into Copilot. For me, I'm a logged in user, right? So by being a logged in user, I have a lot of my data and my settings that are going to be saved within my username and password. We'll talk about a little bit more on that in a few minutes. But beyond Copilot, I also want to talk about ChatGPT. ChatGPT. And we'll talk about what GPT is and what Copilot is as a large language model. So what that is, essentially, it's a framework that allows you to interact with the data and allows the data to interact with you in normal nomenclature, normal language. And what you want to do with that, you don't have to craft certain languages specific to Copilot or GPT, similar to like you would have to do with Google. If I want to find certain things within Google, I will say, within this website, find this and use what we call Google Docs. It's a engineering type term. With Copilot, I can actually just talk in my natural language and say, I'm looking for information on this using Teams chats, voice calls, meetings, and emails. What I want you to do is craft this information and give it to me in this format. So using natural language, a large language model, you can interact with the data in ways previously that weren't available. ChatGPT uses LLMs. Copilot uses LLMs. There's many other types of large language models that are really relevant for today's AI. Future state of AI, you won't have to really develop prompts the way that we have to today to interact with it. But for right now, at least we have to. Has anybody here used Copilot? I have. All right, good. All right, so we got a couple people here who've used Copilot. We'll talk about Copilot as far as the information that's in scope. If you use ChatGPT today, I'm going to save you $20 a month. You log in to Microsoft 365, you log into Copilot, you use a web version of Copilot, that's ChatGPT. Microsoft made a $12 billion investment in OpenAI. So you can get the same results within the web version of Copilot that you can from the paid version of ChatGPT. You have to prompt it very similarly, but there's some nuance to that. But to save money on a monthly basis, there you go. The difference between ChatGPT and Copilot is all of your prompts within Copilot stay within your tenant. You're not training GPT's models. You're not using your data, and putting it out to a third party. You're not creating a data leakage event, right? Whereas if I upload a document into Copilot for work, I can say, I want you to summarize this, give me the talking points for this and that. And it will do that. And the information stays within my 365 tenant. If I do the same with ChatGPT, if I upload a PDF into GPT and say, summarize this, now I'm taking information that should be internal to the organization and giving it to a third party, and now I have no recourse on that. I'm basically helping GPT train its own models, and that's not something that we want to do. We don't want to inherently cause any data leakage events. On the paid versions of Copilots, now we can switch over to the work side of it, and you can start really interacting with the data that is available within the organization. Copilot itself can pull in your emails, your text messages, your SharePoint files, your OneDrive, transcripts from meetings like this meeting. I can pull in all of your data relevant to the organization and still have the functionality of reaching out to the web too, if you enable it. It's not initially enabled within a system, but you can enable that also. So now you're getting a very holistic approach to your data and how to interact with it within 365. But beyond that, not only, and we'll talk a little bit about this. Go ahead, Hank.
Sorry for the so I'm just, I'm a novice at this, and so kind of a knee-jerk reaction was this week we ended up upgrading some of our teams to premium because we had people that basically said, hey, look, we need to use premium to transcribe meetings. And so I just had a plan with this today, and we had some great meeting minutes and action items that came out of upgrading Teams Premium. But yet I've also had somebody whispering in my ear saying that you don't really, that your better direction would have been to go rather than upgrade to premium, which is, I think they said $7 a month per head, was to go to Copilot. So now you're saying this right now, and I'm just a little bit confused. Are you suggesting that, Copilot is the better option and we're piloting things versus ChatGPTs versus premium? And I know it's only an hour. I don't need to.
Yeah, no, certainly.
I'm just curious.
I'll let Mike talk about Teams Premium because I'm not familiar with the nuance of that. What I can say is Copilot itself, holistically, once you have the foundational elements there for security, for identity, and for others, Copilot is able to use a graph database. We'll talk about that in a little bit to pull in all the information and make connections between teams, between all sorts of disparate and separate silos of information, and it can pull it together in one single area and deliver a holistic set of results. Well, Mike, you can talk about Teams Premium. I'm not familiar with Teams Premium.
Yeah. Actually, it's very interesting. Copilot, we use both Teams Premium and Copilot. Microsoft will tell you if you're looking for analysis and review of your meetings, Copilot's going to be enough. There's some other benefits to Teams Premium, sensitivity labels and things like that you may or may not want from a security perspective, but you don't necessarily need both. They do go hand in hand very well, and you will get much better results of meeting minutes and analysis. And the analysis could be, these are the things that were talked about. This is your to-do list. That sort of interaction. We use it very heavily in our project teams here because, it's better to be in a situation where you're editing versus creating, editing, and publishing. If you're editing and publishing, you're going to have much better results, if that makes sense.
And Copilot is what's the expense associated with Copilot with an Office 365?
So Copilot is essentially $1 a day. It's $360 a year. I know that doesn't equate to $1 per day, but that is the limit. There's no charge or there's no monthly agreements right now. That's a one year agreement. If you have a contract and you want to play around with it, and your contract's out in a couple months, you can definitely co-term it. That's actually a good way of doing it and testing it without having to pay for the full year. We definitely would recommend making sure you've got your security in place. The big difference between Copilot and what you have today is Copilot, you ask an intelligent question, it's going to give you the answer. Today, you might have the security risk, but it's going to take a little bit more effort to go looking for what you have access to that you might not.
I think to sum it up, yeah, Copilot is platform, right? The entirety of the platform. And then you have extensions where you can pull in data from other sources. We'll talk about that in a minute, where Teams is focused more on Teams, right? Your Teams Premium is focused within that portion of the application stack.
Thank you.
Sure thing. All right, so we'll talk about extending Copilot itself. So while Copilot does things, with Teams and emails and SharePoint, OneDrive, and transcripts and whatnot, you have the ability, and we'll dive into this a little bit more later on, to extend Copilot. And what that means is if you have a development website that you're creating, it's got a lot of content up there. Or if you have a wiki that's not necessarily available to anybody outside the organization, but it is a data repository within the organization, you can add those things within Copilot and start pulling in those results. You can also add things that are not up in 365 in the cloud as well. You can add local file shares. Right? So there's different ways to integrate on-premise infrastructure within the results that Copilot itself will be delivering to the organization. And we'll talk a little bit more about this afterwards, because we have some great data sources too that we connect into here. But at a high level, this is where we wanted to talk. But before we get really into extending it, let's talk about how Copilot works at its core, right? So when Copilot is first turned on, it has to learn. And how it does that is a thing called the graph database. We had mentioned in the prior slide. Graph database is where all your information goes, right? And the information, once it's stored in there, you have the ability to take it and start extracting both content and context from it. The reason that that's essential is that, Copilot itself, we want it to understand when we say the word bank, we want to understand all the different nuances and where bank is connected. Do we mean a river bank? Do we mean a memory bank for a computer? Do we mean a financial institution when we say bank? Copilot is taking all that information and building out an index, as far as where these things are, and start building the maps between the data that's sitting, that the references bank, between your emails, your files, your chats, and all of that, and saying, okay, this word bank was used here, and now it's all there, and everything. So it's starting to build the bridges and put it together, and that takes time. We talked about GPT, and is it safe to put your information in GPT? And for me, it's safe to prompt it and ask it questions you'd ask Google, but I wouldn't necessarily upload it. Copilot itself, Microsoft 365 itself, once you're logged in, very safe, very inherently there with security wrapped around it at the forefront. One thing also to note too on Copilot is commercial data protection, right? The information that sits within your organization, if you put the information in here and you have commercial data protection in there, you have sensitivity labels applied. If you own your data throughout the organization, your data can be secure. You can upload at any point in time and interact with it. Or if it's already part of your organization, your platform, it's already there, it's already getting it. It's very powerful. But let's take a look at Copilot itself and just throw a quick prompt on it. And again, this is very high level. We're going to start. We're going to really just get into the nitty gritty in a few minutes. But today, let's talk about the weather in Rhode Island. Right, very similar to GPT. You can have it write a poem. You can have it do something very, very meaningful or meaningless, depending on how you want to look at it. But you can also prompt it for internal data, and that's where it's really, really powerful. Well, you can't prompt GPT for that. Right now, you have no inherent way of taking GPT as it sits within their platform and connecting it to your data. You can upload a file here, upload a file there, but you can't see all of your data holistically. So with that, let's jump in a little bit more on the theory side and talk about Copilot and why it does that. So we have our Microsoft application stack. You can see it on the top left-hand side, your Word documents, your PowerPoint, your Outlook, and all of that. What you do is you can actually go into any one of those programs itself. I can open up Teams, I can open up Word or Excel, and I can actually start prompting those with information. I want you to put together a presentation in PowerPoint Copilot that deals with today's event, and I want you to build 10 slides, and then it will, right? Copilot will do that. But how it does that is when you prompt it within the application, within Word, Teams, PowerPoint, Outlook, whatever, not just on the web, it'll go to Microsoft Copilot itself, and then it'll go into that database we talked about where it has all the information for the organization. That's your graph, and it's looking at the content and context of all the emails, files, and chats. Where else does this data sit? Where else does Envision mention the word bank? Is that relevant to the question that Jay asked in Microsoft Word for the information I'm pulling together? It'll take that information, it'll draft a response on the large language model side so that we can respond to me appropriately. But it's not just going to send me the response. It's going to go through this grounding process that says, does Jay have the right security to see the information relevant to the question? I found information about bank, but Jay was asking about a riverbank. I found information about Envision's financial. Should I be sending that to Jay? The answer is no, because it goes through the grounding process. The results it's going to deliver to me are dedicated to the question I asked, but also relevant to the security I have within the organization, right? So there's a lot of power sitting behind that. Just switch over to the next one. My slide's a little bit slow on that. So we'll talk about this for a quick minute as far as ecosystem versus silos, right? And if we think about it right now, ChatGPT is more or less a silo, right? And I love Chat. I use it all the time. I use Dolphin, I use Llama, I use many different large language models. I put on an event over at Gillette last week, and we're using 11 labs and voice cloning. Those are all silos. Those are all applications where Copilot is part of an entire ecosystem, right? Security is a foundational element. Compliance is a foundational element for that. When you have that in there, all the information relevant to the large language model, that graph database, the applications that you're using, and the internet results that's reaching out and getting are all delivered to you in the in the context that you should receive. Is it compliant data? Is it secure? Are you allowed to see it? Do you have the ability to see HIPAA, related data? If the answer is yes, great. If the answer is no, then you won't get that. You'll get other results, but not necessarily that. This portion of it, the security, compliance, and privacy, Envision's terms, in terms of you've been hearing for years now, is zero trust. We do control plans for zero trust, and that's largely what protects this, right? Extending Copilot, we'll jump into that a little bit more, but I showed you quickly how we can add in file servers and whatnot, external data sets. That sits on this side. And then Copilot Studio, we're not going to have time to jump into that today, but if you wanted to create custom Copilots for the organization to give it to your employees with only certain sets of information, or if you wanted to allow part of your internal information to be available to third parties, you can use a Copilot Studio. The design is collaboration tools where you can interact with the populations that you want. We had done a couple of great demos for Copilot Studio at our last movie event, so we can certainly dive into that piece by piece. But overall, what I want to say here is there's a lot of power within an ecosystem as opposed to a silo. GPT, I pay $20 a month for GPT. I also pay $30 a month for Copilot. I have a lot more power in having all of my corporate data wrapped into that $30. Plus, I get my $20 GPT license for free because it's all part of that. So there's savings there. And what we're going to do is we're going to jump into a quick whiteboard session to really talk about this graph. And again, I'm going to be going through a lot of concepts pretty quickly. So we'll keep it high level, but if at any point you have questions, jump in and ask me questions. Anybody, Envision too. All right, so let's talk about what a graph is. Graph database itself, think of it just a giant silo of information. Within this, we have our emails. We have our Word files. We have Excel. We have meetings. I also showed you that we have, we say file servers. And later on, I'll show you how we have Salesforce integrated. All that information gets fed into here, right? To this graph database. And we can select a word, right? Any word. So within an entire email, this email may be, Jay Longley is doing a presentation today on Microsoft Copilot, and we're going to dive into different topics. From the meeting, as part of the notes for the meeting, Copilot will be a term in there. And then today's date, we'll say October. So these will be stored into an index. And this graph, what it does is it feeds this information into the graph, and it says, where else does Copilot in October have a correlation there? Well, this email's been sent out, so we're going to connect that over to here. And well, there was a PowerPoint presentation that's on a file server, so we'll connect that over here too. And there's a Word document that I created really just for the structure. That's over here. The graph itself is finding all of the different terms within my data itself for today and building the bridges between it. And the reason that's powerful is because I don't have to go to Word and look for the one file, or PowerPoint and look for that one file, or I don't have to go to the email and sift through tens of thousands of emails to find it. I can go to Copilot, whether it's Copilot for Teams, Copilot for Outlook, Copilot on the web that we looked at earlier, and I can, with a prompt, say, using my Teams messages, emails, and everything else related to this, find me where the word Copilot in October and Jay Longley all correspond. It will pull up the documents. It will pull up all of that, right? Because of this graph database. This graph database is the critical point within 365 that you'll really just, it's a powerful point of the platform. There are other knowledge graphs out there. In the knowledge graph itself, largely is a silo. So Neo4j example is one of them. It's a silo. You don't have the platform that can automatically plug in all that information. You have to define that. So that's where really the power sits. So now that we've understood Copilot and really the brain behind it, right, which is that graph database, let's talk about some of the different data sources, right? Data sources itself, for us is Salesforce, and we mentioned that quickly earlier. I use a variety of different applications, and you certainly can too. There's a variety of ways to connect those additional data sources into that platform itself, and we'll dive into that a little bit more. But just know that the more data you can feed into that graph database, and the more properly you structure the names and the types of data that you put in there, the more powerful Copilot will be. And it'll include it in results. So let's go back to Copilot. All right, so within Copilot, how do you take Copilot itself and extend it, right? To start pulling in these different settings, the different areas. Within the past couple of days, Microsoft Copilot has actually been updated. Let me just, this menu's in my way, so I'll have to pull this down. You guys probably can't see the menu. Copilot itself in most organizations, if we go into search and intelligence, you'll see data sources. Data sources is how we're pulling that in there. And, ours, you can see Salesforce. When you have the ability to pull in third-party connections, you have the ability to set when you can crawl those, how often you can crawl it, the types of information, who has access to it, right? So you have a lot of functionalities and capabilities within there. We'll take a look at this right now. So you just saw briefly who has access to it. We've taken our Copilot, we've extended it into Salesforce. The reason we've extended it into Salesforce is because if you take a look at this, we've got about 71,000 records in Salesforce that we want to pull into the results. So when I prompt Copilot, it's not looking at what's in the ecosystem also, it's also reaching out to my third party and pulling in everything relevant to, I'll show you United Waffles in a minute, a test area. We can set how often we want it to. We can see errors as it crawls. We can see a lot of details within that ecosystem. In most organizations, you actually have to go into the configurations, the customizations, and that's where you will start pulling in your, it's not in it's in the settings, and ours is changed a little bit. So within Copilot itself, you actually have to enable searching the web. In the past, it hadn't come inherently by default, where you enable that to not just give you relevant internal results to the business. You actually put it to that as well. It's called improve responses with web content. It's a checkbox that allows you to do it. So when you're in search and intelligence, I'm sorry, not search intelligence, we go into Copilot for that. And again, this is the fun of live demos, right? So Copilot itself, settings, and within here, this right now for us is pushing it across the organization, allowing it in there. In some of these other organizations that don't have the recent version of 365 with Copilot, Microsoft kind of upgrades it on the back end, whether or not you like. You would be looking for the improved responses with web content. But here also, you get to take a look within Copilot itself, within your admin console, the adoption by application. And you can see within the platform how many people have adopted it, how many licenses are in play, and who's really using it. We only got a couple of people using it in Loop, but we are using it pretty substantially with Outlook, some Teams, and then other apps as well, right? So you can measure adoption. That's one of the critical pieces of the platform there. We'll take a look back at the admin centers, search and intelligence, configurations, which is the data sources. Beyond here, we'll add a connection, and that's where we're going back to adding the file share itself. If you have the local on-premise file server, that's where you're going to have it. Note that there's 2 licenses that you get for free. Anything beyond that, you'll have to purchase additional licenses. But just because Microsoft doesn't have it in here, it doesn't mean you can't connect it, right? So there's ways and abilities that we can create custom connectors to add it to a third-party site. And we can do that through a variety of different applications or designs. So know that the ability exists with all your different types of data. So you don't want to have an area that has a large set of information, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's grow data, whether it's something outside of 365, you want to see everything holistically, and that's essentially how you would do it, how you'd pull it in there. All right, so let's take a look at Teams real quick. And I'm going to do some prompt engineering within Teams. So if we go into Teams, pull up Copilot within Teams, and you'll know it looks very similar to the Copilot we saw on the web. And I can have it, I'm not going to get very good results because I'm not part of United Waffles, right? United Waffles is our demo, our demo company that we work with. But United Waffles information sits both in Salesforce and other areas too. What it's doing right now is it's finding the results. It found a lot of information about United Waffles, but Jay Longley, I am not a part of that team. I'm not a part of that group. I don't have the security for it. So the results that you're going to see is that there was opportunities that were created, but I can't see the details on it. I'm not a part of that. So it's going back to that grounding process and delivering these results that are relevant to me as a person, right? So that's one of the powerful portions of it. Within here, you'll see the references too. So you can always jump into here and see the different areas that it found. So if you're doing reference checks, while you trust, you also have the ability to verify too. So at any point I can click on one of these, it should bring it up. I may have to log in. If it does, then I'm not going to log into it. Yeah, so I'll have to log in. My security doesn't allow it anyways for me, so it's going to be useless. But at a high level, at least you get to see. All right. One thing, though, that is of specific note is when most organizations have a file share. We, as Envision, don't have a file share. That's why it's not really up there. But most organizations have it. You can have file shares that store on a NAS. One thing that I found time and time again is that file shares become a personal dumping ground of data. Right? People save their home pictures up there in their home drive. They're saving vacation plans. Some are saving tax returns up there. One thing to know is that all the information that sits in the file shares normally in an organization have personal files that are buried within there. And now those personal files, that personal information, if you're using Copilot and have connected this, all that information now becomes part of your graph. So if somebody doesn't have the proper security around their local documents and it has HIPAA related information, and it's not, you don't have the zero trust around it, that information can become part of the graph. And when somebody prompts it, that information can be delivered to them, right? Because again, Copilot looks at the security related to the information. And if you're adding personal file servers or file servers for the organization, that can be a dangerous point. So a word of advice is if you are connecting file servers and file shares, don't just add them, go through them, audit them, create data hygiene practices. You're going to want to solve for having data that's both good, but also data that's bad before it becomes an issue, right?
Yeah, the garbage in, garbage out process is a major factor here. Is if you have a lot of garbage and you're surveying your data, all that's coming in. So even Microsoft will get up in front of everybody and say, cleaning your data is a very, very critical step in this process.
It is. And not only cleaning your data, Microsoft has a way that they like your data to look now. In the past, we would have multiple files, right? So I had traveled to Columbus and I was part of a Channel Pro presentation. So I created my initial Channel Pro presentation, PowerPoint, and I sent a copy of it over to engineering. Engineering makes their version, their edits of it, and they put a dash engineering at the end. And then marketing, I'll send it over to, Matt, and he'll make the marketing version. I'll send it back to the channel manager over there just to make sure that it was followed along with what they wanted for their presentation. And long story short, it took several versions to get to the final version. In the past, that's okay. Right now, what you're looking at is 5 versions that are incomplete and 1 version that is good. So if we take that, you're giving Copilot 80% of the data that's bad, right? That's not necessarily a good thing. So solving for having those old data and that bad data that can be automatically pulled into the graph, you also want to do things like enable versioning. What versioning does is within the final file, all these prior versions should live. You should see my initial version, you should see engineering, all the different edits. So you have iterations in there. So you can see when it was started, who is modified by, and you can also revert to it. And the reason that you want that versioning in there is because Microsoft itself creates a story. Your versioning creates a story. It knows where I started, how I changed, how I iterated, and how I get to the final product. It can't tell that with these 6 files. It just knows that this is my final version. It doesn't know how I got there. So if I wanted to take the information that I have available that it pulls from the graph from all those different places and create a story the way that I would normally create it, to enable versioning, so Copilot itself will understand how Jay works, where he's pulling the data, how he's creating the final version. And that's where you started getting more and more powerful with it. But beyond that too, you want to make sure that not only do you create the versioning, you also want to set things in there like retention policies. Retention policies is a foundational element for zero trust architecture and for Copilot. Copilot really at the foundational level requires requires retention, requires sensitivity labels, and requires clean data with properly formatted names. So let's talk about Copilot itself. Second. All right. So where do you start? Now we've got some theory behind it. We understand how it works. We're really going to start talking about prompting with Copilot, right? And there's a handful of really good training videos for Copilot itself. And this is really what I would start. If it's first time in there, this gives you that foundational understanding of it. So Copilot Lab, great tool that you can go in and you can do some testing. This itself, let's see if I can actually, phenomenal, because before you actually purchase a license, you can see what type of ways you'd have to interact with the data, right? On the third column over here, we see that we have what is it? The craft effective prompts. This is what we're going to get into next. We'll show you a little bit more on this. Great course. Take it. It's 2 hours long. It is long-winded, but once you've gone through it, this is a 15-minute video. Refer to that from time to time again. Every month or so, every couple of weeks. That will help you narrow down the foundational information that you pulled from here. And then you also have the ability to get the better results. So on the technical ready side, there's a video on how Copilot works. We talked about the graph earlier. Great, follow-up one, 10 minutes theoretical, but you'll have that background knowledge, but we largely talked about it already. I believe that, to have that foundational understanding of it, it's highly beneficial to go through some of those. So let's talk about prompting, do's and don'ts. Prompt engineering is the way that we speak to AI, so that way AI can give us the results that we want it to achieve. So what do? Right? You write legibly. That's really the key thing. And you can certainly read through each one of these. I'm going to go through it pretty quick, but write legibly. And what I mean by that is not only do you write the word you, Y-O-U, instead of the short code U, you also want to write and place emphasis on that content and context that we had mentioned earlier, right? So the content around the word bank we had mentioned can be several different things. It could be a memory bank, a food bank, a river bank, financial institution. The more that you can develop a prompt that says, in the context of a river bank, I'm looking for specific information on this engineering plan, and I want it to be delivered to me in these results. The more that you can try to understand how it can read a single word in multiple ways, the better you can communicate with AI and the better that it will give you the results. All right. So what's needed for a prompt itself? Tell Copilot what you need, right? And for me, I tend to ask it easy questions. So I tell Copilot using text, emails, chats, Teams messages, files, please find me all information relevant to when we discussed or sold XYZ product to a person. And it goes through that. I'm not spending 20 minutes looking for an email from 2 years ago. I'm not spending 10 minutes going through file shares trying to find an agreement, or a rate agreement for something, right? I ask it, I prompt it, it gives me all the relevant information, and it allows me to pull up each of the files. So at a high level, that's what I do. But for more complicated tasks, like building a prompt itself, developing in Notepad or Word first, and then I refine it. Last week, I had put on a presentation over at Gillette Stadium. And in that, I spent an entire prompt, a very wordy prompt, teaching AI what I wanted it to know. I gave it Envision's information, the people that work there, the teams that work there, the information on the chief operating officer, the blog articles that he wrote. And I asked it to understand people's specific roles. And I said, Copilot, understand this. And then when you fully understand it, let me know when you're ready. And it did. And from there, I gave it a follow-up prompt, a specific task. Act as a certified ethical hacker, draft an email in the content, tone, and type of Jason Albuquerque that I can use to phish my compliance person. And we performed a hack of an organization using this information in AI. So it was very powerful. You can also use elaborate prompts to do things like develop code. You can develop certain applications. For me, I like to keep eyes on organizations that come to us after a breach happens. I work in the capacity of a breach coach. So as they come to us, I will put feelers out, across the dark web. And if information about that company surfaces, I want to know about it right away. Who's the threat actor involved in that? So to do that, I create custom prompts, and then I create custom sets of code that will allow me to see what information is surfaced for that organization, right? So there's specific tasks, specific ways that you can do that. And AI helps me build, I'm not a coder, AI helps me build the code. So there's a lot of power within prompt engineering. But how do you do that? Copilot has their own way to speak. Llama has their own way. GPT has their own way. Within Copilot itself, we'll talk about this, right? You have to define 4 areas. You have to have a goal, the context, the source, and the expectation. So the goal, generate 3 to 5 bullet points. That's our goal. I only want 3 to 5. The context, prepare me for a meeting with whatever client. to discuss their brand campaign, right? That's the context. That's what I need the information on. 35 bullet points in that context. Here's where I wanted to pull the information: email, Teams, chat since June. I can say anything. I can say meetings. I can say SharePoint libraries. I can say look at Salesforce opportunities, right? Because we have all that. And then what I wanted to do is I wanted to give me simple language so that way I can understand it, because I don't understand marketing speak as much as Matt does. I'm a technologist, right? But I want it to be caught up quickly so I can speak or understand where that meeting is going to go prior to it. So in a very quick way, that's how I would prompt it and have the right ingredients to be able to speak to it. So let's take a quick look at prompt engineering. I think we've got, 15 minutes. Let's take a look at some prompt engineering. We're going to pull up a couple of things. Pull up my Outlook, which is closed right now. I work with Homeland Security on a lot of different things. But Homeland Security also goes by CISA, right? And CISA not only, let's see if I can actually get my Outlook off the screen. CISA goes by and gives you information relevant to not just the things that we're working on itself. They also give me a lot of attack vectors that are happening on a day in and day out basis. So I can go within 365 and I can start prompting Copilot itself. So on here, if you go into your Outlook, you can prompt Copilot. What I wanted to do is, you can see them right here on the side, known vulnerabilities and some international information. Summarize emails in my inbox that contain CISA. And I don't have to do it in this, but just to show you that it has that. I'll pull this off screen for a minute. Make sure it doesn't give anything about an item that we're specifically working on. All right. All right, good. So very quickly, I can see here's some summaries. Vulnerability summary for a week of this, and it's referencing those emails. Industrial control systems and all that. So if I'm looking specifically with an email and I don't want any information outside of email, very quick way for me to reference that in the context of, Outlook, summarize this. Teams. Right, we'll pull back up my Teams. And we looked at the United Waffles, and I don't have the ability to see very much, but Matt and I work together often. Tomorrow we'll be at an airport doing some fun things. So to get a little bit more relevant content, I can say using text, emails, files, chats, summarize what Matt has been working on this week. And this is reference to what we're working on. We're on a project related demo creating fake for United Waffles, right? Because we're doing things like that. I'm sorry, here we go. Coordinate a video project, a day in the life flight. So this is tomorrow, right? So we're talking about the different chats. And then other things that Matt itself has been working on. So there's a lot of abilities within Teams itself too, to be able to pull that together. PowerPoint, I think, is where it gets interesting. I don't know if we have so much time for a PowerPoint because I'm actually using it right now. So skip over that. If you want to connect afterwards, I can certainly show you some examples. But we can still do it with Word too. Let's open up Word real quick. Word. Create a new blank document.
Jay, another feature that's really nice in email is helping you write or auto rewrite something you're communicating to a client. It can help with improving tone and messaging. So
Absolutely.
if you're sending a message and you're angry, it's a great opportunity to sit back and have that come back, and it's going to soften the message that you're actually sending. It does a very good job of that.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of different uses for it, right? Above and beyond some of the other large language models that are out there. So we can pull from various areas of the organization. We can pull from the web. So there's a lot of power within it itself. And I'll take a look back at 365's. Here we go. All right. You can have it prompt And one of the, I think the token things that we see with AI is we have it generate some articles, right? We've all kind of seen that over the last year, year and a half, nothing new. It's good. And this can give you a lot of information around it. It doesn't give you a lot of direction on who's consuming the information. It doesn't really tell you what the focus should be, because we asked it just to write a blog post about the current state of AI, right? And it did. But if I start feeding it more information, develop a prompt a little bit better, I can tell it craft a 750 word blog post about it. I can tell it, the audience is business professionals interested in leveraging AI for a competitive advantage, right? And I can have it dive into that. I want to focus on certain areas. I want to have relevant information from reputable sources, and I want to deliver that here, and it can. So again, we've all kind of seen that. It's good, but the more specific that you get that prompt, the better that information that you can get. You can also have it switch and summarize it in different formats. I don't want to summarize it in blog. I want to give me a table format. Make it a little bit more consumable. Right here you can. Here's a summary of it. Right, this is what we're looking: finding leads, converting to prospects. So that entire article above, we're telling it to put in a different format, and there you go. Right. We can also do background. We've developed some pretty heavy prompts itself, pretty intricate prompts on how to do some background information on an organization, right? And here's just a simple one: describe Envision. This is what Envision does. It's the least specific way to ask a question. There's many more than just one Envision in the world. And on the sources, you can actually take a look. It's found the source itself. It actually found us, and that's where it gave us. In some context itself, it'll find the other Envisions and start delivering things that are not necessarily for just our version of Envision. It's for all the Envisions, including the ones across the United States and globally. So we can ask it to give our list of our services. At points, though, you'll find that this organization itself will list other key contacts. It won't necessarily list everybody. And that's where we jump into responsible AI. So AI has limitations, right? Responsible AI is an actual thing, right? It's a framework. And responsible AI tries to deliver results, but not put anybody at risk. Todd Knapp, CEO, everybody knows this. It's not hidden. But if we start looking at other ways in here to pull stakeholders from the organization, you'll bump into that responsible AI from time to time. There are ways around it. And that's where getting crafty with the way that you develop prompts certainly helps you. Another thing to note too is that AI can hallucinate. So while it gives you these results, in the past, it actually listed other people that weren't part of organizations. It said Todd was our CEO, David Pendleton was part of the executive team. There's no David Pendleton here, there never has been. So AI is great, but it's not accurate 100% of the time. Fact check it. All right. So with that, I know we've run through a lot in less than an hour, but we'll just start wrapping things up. What I would say to do first, visit the training that we looked at earlier, right? There's a lot of great training in there, and those couple of ones that I really pulled out will certainly help you get the foundational information, the security that you need, the proper way to prompt it, and then just review it from time to time. Evaluate before you put in Copilot, before you put in your first license. Evaluate the tenant. We can do the evaluation for you. We have these no-cost evaluations. What we look for is to ensure that you have labeling and proper security in place, because if you don't have that in place, then you're not ready for Copilot. You're just not. So be on a path towards that. Labeling tools is really owning your own data. It's something we really didn't get into. It's more on the zero trust side, but own your data, label it properly, tag whatever's HIPAA, tag whatever's 201, CMR 17, tag whatever's high tech, ensure that it's compliant, ensure that the information itself is not just secure, but ready for AI. Train the talent. Don't just give them Copilot. They're not going to be successful with it. You would have thrown money away if you did, right? Train them. Show them how to name files, how to tag files, how to prompt properly. Make sure that the semantic index that is set up is not confusing. You're not pulling in 6 versions of a presentation. You pull in one that's got versioning enabled in there. And then also create a pilot group for it. Pilot groups are an essential part of adoption within Copilot itself. because that's where peers will help themselves and help others. Otherwise, it's you can see people struggle. And with that, we'll have another one of these in November. We try to keep it to an hour, but again, it's 3 hours worth of content. So if at any point you want to take a deeper dive, let me know. Be around. I'm happy to do these at any point. Any questions for anybody? No?
Very much.
It's good stuff, Jay. Thanks.
Right on.
Yeah, I learned a lot today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, great presentation, Jay. Thank you.
All right. Appreciate it. All right, y'all. You have a good rest of your day, and I will see you soon. All right, thank you.
Thanks. Take it easy, man. Thank you.